Good morning, everybody. I'm Heather Murphy, Senior Director of Inbound Marketing. I have Christian Schomer here, who is a Director of Product Management here at ayfie. Today, we're going to be talking about smart assistants and why are they so dumb, their limits and opportunities. Christian, if you want to move forward with your next slide, that would be great.
Sure.
I just wanted to let everybody know that by default, everybody is muted. So I wanted to make sure that everybody can hear us loud and clear. We're going to pop up a poll real quick. So if everybody could submit if they can hear us loud and clear, that would be awesome. I'd very much appreciate that. Let's see here. I'll give you a second to be able to let us know. If everybody could submit that. Perfect. So it looks like everyone can hear us loud and clear. Great. So just a few housekeeping rules. We are recording today's session and we will be sharing the recording and the slides in the next week. All participants, like I just said, are muted by default. Don't be shy to ask any questions. On your right-hand side, there's a raise hand button. Feel free to raise your hand. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to share any of this presentation via your social media channels, please feel free and use the hashtag #AyfieInsights and enjoy the webinar. Christian, why don't you introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much, Heather. So thank you very much for joining. My name is, as already said, Christian Schomer. I'm a Director of Product Management here at ayfie. I'm based in Munich, Germany, where, as we said, it's already late afternoon, but I'm very happy to be here. I have a history in natural language processing, short NLP. So I have a master's degree in something that is called computational linguistics, which might not say much to most of you, but it's essentially the practice of making machines understand human language. Not so much on a phonetic level, so not so much on an audio level, but more really on a textual level. And I'll also give you a very short summary of what we at ayfie do. Because this is essentially our main subject that we're doing, so the text analytics part, and this is also how it all ties into the smart assistant topic, as we think. So my history is that I've a lot of years experience in technology. So I worked at a company, some may recall, called Fast Search, which got acquired by Microsoft. After that, I went to a company called Endeca. It's a commerce search engine, might be better known in America than in Europe. And that got acquired by Oracle. So now I'm finally here since January of 2007 at ayfie. Very happy to be here, a Director of Product Management, and sharing my passion for technology in general with you during this webinar. So why am I at ayfie, and what does ayfie in general do? I want to make sure that this won't be a product presentation of any kind. So I'm just highlighting why it makes sense that we as ayfie talk about this topic of smartness. Because what we do here at ayfie is we analyze big chunks, big corpuses of text, so big texts, and we extract information from that with AI as well as machine learning, text analytics. We put linguistics at play here, so we can extract and derive and harvest the most semantic information from text as possible. So for instance, we have products that do analyze contracts, or we have products that analyze personally identifiable information, short PII, and all these kinds of things. And of course, that is also important, the smartness, if you will, to understand humans, not just on a verbal level, but really on a semantic level. So what do humans say, and what do they mean by that command or by that utterance that somebody has potentially made. Right, so let me, now that you know what ayfie essentially does, let me quickly go through the agenda. At first, we want to look at the very short, to be honest, history of smart assistants. Then, of course, everybody has his or her experience with smart assistants, so they have examples of where it probably went wrong. No smart assistants on the planet did everything right so far. And how do they work? I won't go into technical details, but I just want to give you, the individual steps that need to happen in order for a smart assistant to do the right thing at the right time when you give it a command. Then what are the limits of those smart assistants and the opportunities? Later on, we'll also have a Q&A session, so question and answer. So it's your chance then to ask questions. I try to answer them as good as possible. So please don't be shy. Now here comes our next poll. So please let us know if you are using any smart assistants. So maybe you use Apple's Siri or Microsoft's Cortana, Amazon's Alexa, obviously Google's Google Assistant or Google Home, and or you use any other assistant. So there are also some that are in, for instance, Samsung phones. You might be familiar with Bixby, or do you not use any at all? So that would be very interesting for us. So we're running the poll for a couple of seconds. Right. So interestingly enough, we have 50% using the Google Assistant, 38% using Siri. So you might have an iPhone or an Apple HomePod. 25% are using no smart assistant at all, and 13% are using Alexa. So very interesting. Thank you a lot. So nobody's using Cortana, I might add. Now let's look at the history of those smart assistants. The history, they are not around for a very long time, since a very long time. So famously, Apple introduced Siri as part of the iPhone 4S launch in 2011. And it was pretty impressive back then, what it all could do. Then in 2012, we had Google Now joining the game, which is now evolved into Google Assistant and Google Home, so could be considered the same thing. We have Microsoft's Cortana, which essentially, now that they don't have a mobile platform anymore, lives pretty much exclusively on Windows 10, but they also have some third-party contracts, so other devices might integrate that in the future more. Then we have in 2014, end of 2014, Amazon entering the arena with their Alexa device, which was pretty popular. Now, if you have seen recent trade shows, Alexa is pretty much built into all or very many smart devices. So you have fridges, you have sound bars who are Alexa enabled. And then ultimately in 2016, Google came up with their latest installment of smart assistants called Google Assistant, and also put that into a little box, into a little speaker called Google Home in November 2016. Later on, also Siri. So Apple put in Siri into that speaker, into that box called HomePod, and that's essentially where we are at. Now, if you look at the distribution of those, or the usage of those assistants over time, we have this chart here, and it's very interesting. I only want to point out a couple of things. So one being that you see the purple and the black line on the bottom there. Those are the devices that are static, that don't go anywhere. They are not on a smartphone. It's Amazon Alexa and Microsoft Cortana, although it seems like Alexa is really being used a lot. Apparently, it's not used nearly as much as those mobile assistants. So in this case here, Apple Siri and Samsung's Bixby. So they are used much more by way more people. And of course, you have Google Assistant coming into play here and having a very steep curve. So probably projectively in 2021 being used a lot more. And also very interesting is the red line here. So we have those Chinese assistants, which, you know, if you buy a Xiaomi or a Huawei phone these days, you might have in the future one of those Chinese-based assistants on it as well. Now that's just for statistics, right? Now let's look into where smart assistants go wrong. So of course, if we would be happy with everything they do, we probably wouldn't have that conversation here. Now, this is just a representation of things that those smart assistants didn't do right. And I also want to point out, we're not trying to bash any particular smart assistant. It depends really on what you ask it. Some are better in some things, others are better in other things. So although this obviously is Google Assistant here, and on my next slides, I also have examples for Siri and Alexa, please, we're just very objectively talking about smart assistants in general. Okay, so here's an example, navigate to my sister, and it seems like the fallback solution for every smart assistant that has a screen is to show things on the web. So here we have 10 things to remember about toxic family members, which is not the nicest thing to reference with that request, but yeah, that's obviously a request gone wrong. The other one already gives you an idea of how much knowledge you have to have of the world in order to execute those requests correctly. So how far away is the North Pole from the South Pole? Now here, it has looked up, the system has looked up an address somewhere at North Pole, Alaska, and S Pole, so South Pole in Logan. So while that is technically a correct answer, it's probably not what the person asking the question expected. So there you already can see that it would have known that probably when you talk about the North Pole and the South Pole, you're talking about the caps of the Earth, not those specific cities. Right, so other examples here on the very left. You need to hear me correctly, Siri. Thanks for that, Adam. I'm saying you're not doing a good job. It's nice to have one's work appreciated. So it didn't pick up the not. So those things happen as well. Of course, it as you can see here, it turned everything correctly into text. So it understood the words, or from a phonetic perspective, it was all right. But from a semantic perspective, it didn't know how to handle it. The example in the middle, I don't even know what to say about that. The request is, what is the cost of a train ticket from Sydney to Brisbane? And the answer is just, outrageous. It doesn't make any sense. The answer is about 28.8 quadrillion kilometers US dollars squared, whatever that means. So it took the production budget of the movie Train into consideration, but also the distance between Sydney and Brisbane. Don't know what that is. So definitely wrong answer. The last one is actually not a wrong answer if you look at it strictly. So should I wear a t-shirt? No, it's probably dark. Okay, t-shirt might not referring to being dark or light outside, but as usual, Siri is pulling up the weather forecast as it does in many cases. Or let's say one of the most annoying things about those smart assistants is when you talk to them, it feels like you're talking to Dory from Finding Nemo, right? So if you know that character, she forgets everything in a matter of seconds. So in this example, for instance, so when is the US presidential debate? The third presidential debate is at 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday, October 19th. Add that to my calendar. When is the event? So that is really a very Dory-like reply. And the reason simply is that it cannot resolve the so-called pronoun. So the add that to my calendar is referring to something that has been said before, but it doesn't take that into consideration. And I from a technical perspective, want to tell you that it's really hard to track all these references, and that it's quite awesome what people can do, or referring to things that have been said minutes, if not hours ago, and still, following a conversation in a way that they know what that is, even though it might have been long ago. So human beings, pretty good at that. Smart assistants, not yet. I'm not saying that this won't be solved. This will probably be solved quite soon. And maybe you may have heard also the example where Google has shown that the Google Assistant could do a conversation, or could make an appointment at a barber's shop. So that worked in that particular example that they showed, but nobody could really try it yet. But I'm sure they will figure that out pretty soonish. Okay, another example here. In this case, Google Alexa, I'm owning an Alexa device, and I'm getting at least once a week. I would say I get these emails where I'm being told, hey, you can ask Alexa, these funny things. So for the most part, it's funny and it's not really useful. So we divided them into two parts. One being the funny request. Okay, what does the fox say? It's obviously referring to the 2012 song where it answers rig-a-dig-a-dig-a-ding and stuff like that. Do you like pizza is also a quite funny request. So my children do that all the time. They ask Alexa to do the dishes and stuff like that. So stuff that cannot happen in real life. What happens if you step on a Lego? So there are a lot of, and what my point being here is that there are a lot of things that have been programmed into the system by an engineer, or by a team of engineers. So you have a request which you actually have to ask pretty precisely, and it's referring to a certain answer. And you're quite happy that it answers in a seemingly smart way, but it's actually not that smart because it's very much hardwired. Do you know the Muffin Man? So all these are not really very useful. Right, so then we have the useful ones: add a team meeting to my calendar, play the Foo Fighters. My children love that. Before they could write, they could listen to the music they wanted because they could just talk to the system. The next one is the one I use the system most for is smart home. So close the shades, set the night mode on bedroom TV, etc. What am I doing tomorrow? That's a calendar reference again. And what I really liked was the announce that dinner is ready on all my network echoes. Didn't know that that worked, but I will definitely use that in the future. Right, so the accuracy, taking that with a grain of salt. So this is an example that Forbes magazine did. They came out, it very much depends on the type of questions you ask. So, but in this case, in their example, they came out at 74.6% correct answers for Google Assistant smart home. So they even, smartphone, sorry. So they even distinguish between smartphone and home. Then we have Cortana, interestingly enough. Nobody in this audience is using Cortana, but Forbes says 59.5% accuracy. Assistant Home, 58%, Alexa, 44.3%, and finally Siri with 32.7%. Right, so by the way, I also want to mention there that you might experience some seasonal changes with your smart assistant. So sometimes when it's let's say, for instance, in America, Super Bowl time, it will be able to tell you very accurate stats of every player that plays on the Super Bowl. But this kind of information might go away throughout the rest of the year. So at the moment, while recording this, so if you're watching the recording, it's beginning of December of so shortly before Christmas. So probably now some Christmas questions might be answered more correctly than others. Okay, so before I actually come to the point where I want to explain what the steps involved are, please let's have another poll, and please tell us how accurate you think your smart assistant, the individual one you're using, is. So is it very accurate, somewhat accurate, not accurate at all, or are you still not using a smart assistant? So maybe we can keep that a little bit shorter to stay on time. So okay, so here we go. Somewhat accurate, that's exactly what I expected. 71%, not accurate at all, 14%, and I don't use it, is 14%. So, okay, very interesting, but essentially what I expected. Now, let's compare a smart assistant that we now anonymously call Smarty with a human being Sam, right? Let's just say there's an assistant called Sam, and let's compare a request that might sound like this: schedule a meeting with Peter on Friday. So how do they both perceive that and execute the command? Now, first both have to do those three steps essentially. So you have to transform speech to text, which in most smart assistants works very nicely. So we have an accuracy of about 97%. So that is rarely ever a topic or a problem. I can remember when I studied computational linguistics and also phonetics 15 years ago, that was a big problem still. So we weren't able to understand or to turn words into written text that easily. So that is a problem already solved, which is great. Now the next one is where ayfie specifies, or which ayfie tries to do most of its work, and that is text to semantics. So we have a written text and we try to extract as much meaning from this bag of words as possible. And the third one is semantics to action. So if you know what the concept of the request was, then you have to turn around and do something. Now, how does Sam do it? First of all, he has no problem understanding the words, most likely. And he already does a semantic parsing on the go. So he recognizes, okay, you just had a call with Peter Green, which is our business partner. So you probably might mean that Peter when requesting to put that, to have a meeting with a Peter. Now, then when it comes to Friday, something could be considered like you might mean next Friday, because this Friday is a bank holiday, for instance. So a lot of knowledge already being put into answering that request, and there is no duration for the meeting, so we just go with 1 hour as a default. put it into both calendars, done, ready. So that was really good. And as I said before, we're not trying to bash those smart assistants here. So we're using an example that is actually implemented very nicely in those smart assistants. So Smarty also does schedule, understands the request easily, so no problem. And then there is a conversation, right? There's a question. What time is the appointment? Then you tell it what time. The next question is, which Peter do you mean? And actually, in this case, I used Siri for that request. It answered with, here's a list of Peters in your address book, which is quite impressive. But again, this is not smartness. This is not derived from some general knowledge or some, by reading a lot of text or something like that. So not really an AI task, but it's been built into this exact conversation flow by a team of engineers. Right, so as I said, text-to-speech, problem pretty much solved. So when you hear the utterance schedule A, the next term might more likely be meeting instead of meet thing, for instance, right? Quite funny, honestly, I think. But the probability model tells you that it's a meeting, right? So meet thing is probably not the right thing that the person said. So understanding is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem, again, is text to semantics. So what we at ayfie also want to do, and what those smart assistants need to do either, is to put that into a programmatic form. So we have these request patterns that have certain slots that need to be filled. And here we have the action, which is the scheduled meeting. That is what needs to be done. Then in this particular case, we have the participants. So we have a participant, in this case, Peter Green, then a time, Friday, a duration. We didn't have any information, so we can use some default information, right? So Smarty is also able to fulfill that request. Now, that is due to variance, ambiguity, and context. So things can be said in a variety of different ways. Ambiguity, some things might mean the same in different contexts. And in general, context is very important. So you need to know what is the environment. So in this case, it's a business environment. So that's why this meeting is to be put into the online calendar probably. And so a couple of things can be assumed there. Context is king is the statement here. And now when it comes to variance, we hear that, as I said, there are thousands of different ways to express something. One being, for instance, schedule an appointment, set up a call, I want to have a meeting with, put something into my calendar. It all means pretty much the same thing, but those smart assistants are not very flexible at consuming those different types of requests. So you are in a very strict corset of things, in a very, very strict boundaries. So that it can understand you. Also, then it comes to filling the other slot, who is Peter? That works again by looking up the address book probably. And finally, the date. Excuse me. On Friday, which Friday? We need to consider bank holidays and stuff like that. And ultimately, we have semantics to action. So we want to take an action and do something with the information that we have. So we have filled the slots of this request pattern as an example. And again, ayfie has builds out thousands of those request patterns that we can try to fill as good as possible with the right values, and then offers it either as a way of investigating into a document, so for instance, a contract. But in this case, of course, those smart assistants want to take an action. And here the action is put that request into the calendar, but certainly there are so many different possibilities that this smart assistant would have to deal with if it were intelligent, if you could ask it any kind of question. So for instance, a question, what can I cook tonight? If you don't have a recollection, or if you don't have information on what the person likes, or in this case, what is in the smart fridge, then it would be very hard to answer that question. And the more access those smart assistants get to our data, the better they will become at answering those questions. But so far, we are very limited to a couple of those use cases, like telling the weather, like putting something into a calendar, or asking it the distance between the Earth and the Moon, which is also a very common request. And by the way, a fun fact, the most requested thing on all smart assistants is setting a timer. So set a timer, that is the most frequent request. So I hope I could make you understand, make you aware of some of the problems that those smart assistants are facing. And although they are called smart assistants, they have a very hard time understanding concept of the general world and thereby answering those questions correctly. Right. So if you have further questions, please contact Heather Murphy. And I think now we're opening up for questions.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. And actually, Christian, we do have some questions from the audience. Let's see here. So Christian, here's a good one. Do you think that we'll ever be able to have a proper conversation with smart assistants?
Yes, I think so. So the patterns, as I said, at the moment, I think they're pretty much pre-made. So they are put into a very strict conversation pattern. But it will get around by asking the questions to be more specific or something like that. So it will try to get you back on track or to rephrase your question, but it will not stop the conversation as it does right now. So I'm very convinced by that. And Google shows I don't know how real that example was where they make that appointment at the barbershop, but that will probably happen pretty soon.
Will that be because the device itself will be doing more machine learning within your home, within your own environment, or what do you believe that to be true?
Well, so the interesting part on that is that Google is the most successful in that, and Google is actually also the company that has the most linguistic knowledge. They know a lot about language. They're not simply basing their whole company on machine learning, although it might seem that way these days. But apart from them doing a lot of machine learning, obviously, and I think a lot can be learned, and I think that a lot of domain knowledge, a lot of linguistic knowledge needs to be put into those extraction mechanisms to understand texts. And that's what we truly believe at ayfie also.
Okay, here's another one. Do you think smart assistants, this is a good one, do you think smart assistants in the future will replace human assistants?
Well,
going into the Jetsons realm a little bit more.
Right. I think if you can live with being limited to a certain set of requests that you might do, so it won't do those requests. Hey, buy my wife flowers, or well, maybe it does. Okay, actually, that's a
that's a bad example.
Because I think that what it will actually will be possible, but yeah, it will not be. I think the point is that it might actually fulfill the purpose of a smart assistant. So in that business environment where you only have a set of questions or a set of requests that you might be able to ask, maybe yes, but I definitely think that there won't be something that, at least in the near future, that we can consider a general intelligence.
Okay, one just came through here. Why does ayfie focus so much on natural language processing?
As I said, so we're combining machine learning and our linguistic models that we develop here at ayfie, and we combine both. So while we think that if you have tons and tons of texts where you can run your machine learning on, it takes a long time to get to good results. Whereas when you put more information up front into the text, or you extract information from those texts and inject semantics into that, you can get to much better machine learning results with much less data, so much less test data. And since we're operating in an environment where we are operating on a lot of sensitive data for clients, for law firms, for instance, who have a hard time putting that onto a cloud system, we have to work entirely in that scope of documents that they give us. And thereby we said, okay, it makes more sense to actually inject linguistic knowledge into those documents and then run machine learning on top, because then with the comparably limited amount of data, we get to much better results, as I said.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Oh, this is a good one. I heard that smart assistants have seasonal knowledge, like for Super Bowl, etc. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, so it happens it happened in the past also that, for instance, a pretty famous example, Walter Mossberg, who is who's now a retired editor or reporter, who wrote a very bad article about smart assistants, and he made some examples. And it turned out that by the time, or a couple of hours after he had released that article, those smart assistants were able to do those things he tested and they weren't able to do. So that means there are actually engineers working on those on a server side, and putting more information on certain topics into those smart assistants or not. And that is also true for seasonal information. So when you have events like an election or Super Bowl sports events coming up, they are definitely better equipped to answer those questions during those times than at other times. Of course, there is this general Wikipedia knowledge. If you ask how many Super Bowls have there been and who won which Super Bowl and so on, I think that kind of information will still be there. But in order to avoid mistakes, too many mistakes, where it answers a seemingly similar question with the wrong answer, my feeling is, or actually, many people's feeling is that Apple and Google and so on, they're taking out a set of questions which might not be relevant at a certain point in time.
Okay, great. So I think in the event of time, that's all we have for today. If you guys have any further questions, please feel free to email me, Heather Murphy, heather.murphy@ayfie.com, and we can get back to you as soon as possible. I'd like to thank Christian. Christian, thank you so much for your time today, and all the attendees. Like I said, we will be sending out the slides and the recording next week, so you can view at your viewing pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks a lot, Heather.
Take care.
Goodbye, everybody.